So today we're going to talk about adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. Unlike denominators mean that the denominators are different, just like in this picture here on this slide. We have a 3 and we have a 4, and those are not the same, so they are different or unlike. So let's talk about this picture when we're adding fractions. We've learned in minute math, like if you have 1/4 and then you have 3/4 and you want to add them, you can go ahead and do it. Remember, we call these no-brainers because you can go ahead and add because the denominators are the same. So you just say 1 plus 3 is 4 over 4. An alarm goes off in our head because 4 over 4 is 1. So those are pretty easy. And the other ones with unlike denominators, you have to do a little bit more work. You need to find a common denominator first before you add them. So if I was doing 1/2 plus 1/3, I would first want to write it vertically. It's easier if you write it and you leave space and you remember to use neat handwriting. And remember that we learned least common multiple so that we could use it when we're trying to find a common denominator. You don't always have to use your least common multiple because there are plenty of common multiples that you could possibly find. But the thing about using the least or the smallest common one is you won't have to do as much work. So you won't have as many alarms going off in your head if you use the least common multiple. So what I suggest you do is you take your denominators, so 2 and 3 here, and you start listing its multiples. And remember that I told you that if you start with the largest number, you'll get there quickly. So 3 times 1 is 3. Well, 2 can't go into 3, so I'll do the next one. 3 times 2 is 6. 2 will go into 6 evenly, so 6 is going to be my common denominator. And as you see, they made it the common denominator. But we've learned that if we change the bottom or if we change the denominator, then we have to change the top also in the same way for it to be an equivalent fraction. If we didn't, that equal sign wouldn't be true. It wouldn't be equal. So you have to do the same to the top and to the bottom. So if we looked at this and we changed the denominator to 6, you have to ask yourself, what did I do? Well, I said times 2 because 3 times 2 is 6. But if I do times 2 on the bottom, then I have to do times 2 on top. And that's how I got 1 times 2 equals 2. Over here on this one, we changed it to 6, so we ask ourselves, what did we do? Well, we times it by 3 because 2 times 3 is 6. So in order to make it an equivalent fraction, you have to do the same thing to the top. So if you did times 3 on the bottom, you have to do times 3 on the top, and that's how they got 1 times 3 is 3. Once your denominators are the same, then you can go ahead and add your fractions, just like we've been doing in minute math. 3 plus 2 is 5 over 6. An alarm will not go off in our head on this one because it's already in simplest form, or it has already been reduced, or it's already in its lowest terms. And I know this because these numbers are consecutive numbers. Anytime they are consecutive or neighbors on the number line, then you know that you've done everything you need to do, and it's in simplest form. So let's try another one. What if I had 5/8 and I wanted to add 3/10? Well, my denominators are different. So since they are different, I would always write them vertically, and I would leave space in between. Remember how important handwriting is in math. Very important to use neat handwriting and you space it out so you have plenty of space to work with. Now, I can't go ahead and add these because my denominators are different. So I'm going to need to find a common denominator. Remember that if you find the least common multiple, you can use that as your common denominator. So I'm going to take 8 and 10, and I'm going to list the multiples. I like to start with the largest one. So 10 times 1 is 10. Can 8 go into 10 evenly? No. So 10 times 2 is 20. 8 times anything equal 20? No. 10 times 3 is 30. Can 8 go into 30 evenly? No. 10 times 4 is 40. Can 8 go into 40 evenly? Yes. So that is my very first one, or my least one, where I come to where they are common or the same. So that is going to be my common denominator. So I'm going to turn this 10 into a 40, and I'm going to turn this 8 into a 40. so that now my denominators are the same. But I've learned that if I change the bottom, I have to change the top in the same way. So you ask yourself, what did I do from here to here? Well, I said times 4, because 10 times 4 is 40. But if I do times 4 on the bottom, I have to do times 4 on the top in order for it to be an equivalent fraction. So then I say 3 times 4 is 12. And then I ask myself, over here, what did I do? Well, I said 8 times 5, because 8 times 5 is 40. But remember, I've got to be fair. And if I do times 5 on the bottom, then I have to do times 5 on the top. So 5 times 5 is 25. Well, now my denominators are the same, so I'm ready to add. So I take my numerators, 25 and 12, and I add them, and I get 37 over 40. Now, always ask yourself, will an alarm go off in your head? On this one, it will not, because there is not another number other than 1 that can go into both 37 and 40. So I know that I have it in simplest form, and I am done. And that is my final answer. Now, let's look at one more where I'm adding. Let's take 3/5 and add 1/4. Well, since my denominators are different, then I'm going to write them vertically. And I'm going to leave space in between so I have plenty of room to work. And then I'm going to start listing its multiples. If my denominators are 5 and 4, then I'm going to start listing the 5's multiples first. So 5 times 1 is 5. Can 4 go into 5 evenly? No. So 5 times 2 is 10. Can 4 go into 10 evenly? No. 5 times 3 is 15. Can 4 go into 15 evenly? No. 5 times 4 is 20. Can 4 go into 20 evenly? Yes. So that is going to be my first one or my least one where they are common. So I'm going to use it as my common denominator. So I change my denominators to 20, but then I remember that I have to be fair. And if I change the bottom, I have to change the top in the same way. So let's find out how we change the bottom. For this one, we said times 5 because 4 times 5 is 20. So up here, I have to do times 5 because remember, in order for them to be equivalent, I have to do the same. So 1 times 5 is 5. And then over here, I did times 4 because 5 times 4 is 20. So what do I have to do up here? That's right, times 4. So 3 times 4 is 12. Now my denominators are the same, so I'm ready to add. And 12 plus 5 is 17 over 20. Now I ask myself, is an alarm going to go off in my head? On this one, it is not, again, because there is no other number other than 1 that can go into both 17 and 20. So this is already in simplest form. So I'm done. Now, when you are subtracting fractions, it's the same thing. Except when you find your common denominator, you just subtract. So if we had, let's see here, let's try. Well, let's look at this one. First of all, the first one they gave us. So if we're doing 5/7, take away 2/3. We can't subtract because our denominators are not the same. So I'm going to list my denominators, and I'm going to start with the highest one. I'm going to start listing its multiples. 7 times 1 is 7. Can 3 go into 7? No. 7 times, well, not evenly. 7 times 2 is 14. Can 3 go into 14 evenly? No. 7 times 3 is 21. Can 3 go into 21 evenly? Yes. So that is going to be my common denominator, and that's why they picked that one. But we know that if we change the bottom, we have to change the top in the same way. And here, if we change the bottom, we have to change the top. Once the denominators are the same, we can go ahead and add them. And then when we add them, we get on this one. Oh, I'm sorry. We're subtracting on this one. So we're not adding. Always look at your sign. We didn't have a sign there down here. So we got to remember. So we're going to subtract. I like to actually circle my sign. So 15 take away 14 is going to be 1 over 21. Now this is already in simplest form because it is a unit fraction. Remember, we've learned anytime there's a 1 as your numerator, we call it a unit fraction, and it's already in simplest form. So let's try another one. let's say that I had, let's do 7/12, take away 1/3. Well, since the denominators are not the same, I would write them vertically very neatly. And make sure that I copied it correctly. I can't go ahead and subtract because I don't have common denominators. So I'm going to list my denominators and I'm going to start listing the multiples. What's 12 times 1 is 12. Can 3 go into 12 evenly? Yes. So right there is my least common multiple and I'm going to use it as my common denominator. Now, but remember, I've learned that if I change the bottom, I've got to change the top in the same way. So how did I change this one down here? I said 3 times 4, or times 4, because 3 times 4 is 12. So what do I have to do up here? Times 4, and 1 times 4 is 4. And then I check this one out. Now this one did not change, so this one will not change. Now that my denominators are the same, I'm ready to subtract. So 7 take away 4 is 3/12. Now on this one, an alarm is going off in my head right now because I know there is another number that can go into both 3 and 12 other than 1, and it's going to be 3. So to get it in simplest form, I would need to divide by 3. Now remember, it's just the same here. Same rule here. If you're trying to make an equivalent fraction, you have to do the same to the top and the bottom. So if I'm going to divide by 3 on the top, then I've got to divide by 3 on the bottom. So 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. So my final answer is 1/4. Let's do one more. So if I had, let's do, if I had 4/5, take away 1/6. Of course, I would write it vertically, and I would write it with a space, and I would write it very neatly. And then I would list my denominators, and I would start with the largest one first. 6 times 1 is 6. Can 5 go into 6 evenly? No. 6 times 2 is 12. 5 times anything equal 12? No. 6 times 3 is 18. Still a no. 16 times 4 is 24. Still a no. 16 times 5 is 30. That's going to be my first one where they come to where they are the same. So I'm going to make my denominators 30. But I remember that if I change the bottom, I've got to change the top in the same way. So how did this one change? Times 5. So how does this one have to change? Times 5. 1 times 5 is 5. Now, how did this one change? Times 6. So how does this one change? Times 6. And 4 times 6 is 24. Now that we have common denominators, then we can go ahead and we can subtract. 24 take away 5 is 19/30. Now, an alarm is not going off in my head on this one because there is not another number other than 1 that can go into both 19 and 30. And 19 is a prime number, and 19 will not go into 30 evenly. So I know I have it in simplest form. All right, so you can watch these videos, and we will continue to practice them in class. You're going to be great at this.